There's no doubt that Venom has been one of Spider-Man's fiercest foes to face, and the history of the character is just fascinating, especially when it comes to the behind the scenes of how the black Spider-Man costume was created in the first place, and how a series of events ended up turning it into the character of Venom. Welcome to Comic Misconceptions. I'm still Scott, even though it feels like forever since I've talked to you guys. It's so good to be back after that long holiday hiatus, and the first thing we're gonna tackle this year is one that a ton of you guys have been vaguely asking about for months: Venom. I mean, mostly you guys have been asking me to do the video that lists all the symbiotes and hosts and stuff, but that's not what we do here. Come on, guys. You know better. So instead, I thought I could do another Real Origins episode that discusses all the cool things that happen behind the scenes of the creation of the character, as opposed to, you know, just talking about his adventures and powers and stuff. I won't be getting into Venom's comic book origin and history and all that stuff too much, since my friend Eris over at Variant already did that, and I have nothing else to add to it. He did a great job. So you can click here. Let's do this over here. I'm still working out this new set. If you want to go check out that video as maybe a precursor to this one, and, you know, leave a comment. Tell them NerdSync sent you. It's good publicity. But now, let's get to the real origin of Venom. So before there was Venom, there was Black Suit Spider-Man. Why the costume change? Well, it's actually kind of complicated. Like always, I will have the sources in the description below if you want to go do some further research in case I didn't explain something well enough, which hopefully I think I will. Back in the early 80s, Marvel was running a contest for comic book fans who wanted to break into the business. Now, I wasn't able to find too much information on this competition, but we do know that one huge Spider-Man fan named Randy Schueller entered, and that's where our story begins. Schueller had this idea of updating Spidey's costume to a more stealth-style suit. It would be all black, save for the Spider-Man emblem on his chest, which he had planned to be red originally. There were other design elements as well, like webbing under the arm, a more advanced web shooter system, and it would be designed by Wasp and made by Mr. Fantastic out of the same unstable molecules that his and the rest of the Fantastic Four's costumes are made of, allowing Spider-Man to better stick to walls. Schueller submits his entry and waits a few months when he receives a letter in the mail from then editor-in-chief of Marvel, Jim Shooter, saying that he wants to buy the concept from Schueller for $220 at the time, which is roughly around $530 today. Shooter even offered Schueller a chance to write the script that they would turn into an actual comic book. Unfortunately for Schueller, I guess writing wasn't really his strong suit. At least that's the way that Tom DeFalco, who was working on Amazing Spider-Man at the time, recalls it in an interview from 2005 in Back Issues magazine. Apparently, Schueller's original proposal for the story just didn't work, and DeFalco was in charge of working with him to craft a better story. As time went on, the whole thing fell apart, and the idea was scrapped. Then, in 1984, the toy company Mattel approached Marvel about creating a new toy line of Marvel superhero action figures to answer Kenner's DC Superpowers toy line of their characters. One of the requirements Mattel had was that Marvel had to create this big event in the comics that would get a lot of attention and create a theme for the toy line. Mattel had also done some research with focus groups and found that kids in those days responded positively to the words wars and secret, and that's basically how we get the classic comic book event, Marvel Superheroes Secret Wars. As many of you may know, it was issue 8 of Secret Wars where we see Spider-Man getting his black costume, but that was not the first issue that we see Spidey in his new suit. It was a few months earlier in Amazing Spider-Man number 252 where we see him swinging through the streets in his new digs for the first time. This is because the end of Amazing Spider-Man number 251 shows Spidey being transported to Battleworld, and issue number 252 shows him coming back from Battleworld after a few days with the black costume. The Secret Wars storyline is meant to fill the gaps of what happened as sort of a flashback. This includes how Spidey acquired the black suit in the first place. But why did they make the suit a living organism? That wasn't in the original draft by Schueller. Where did that idea come from? Well, writer-artist John Byrne tells the story of how that was his idea. He was working on Iron Fist at the time and noticed how his costume would get torn up one issue and then miraculously healed in the next. And he didn't like the idea of Iron Fist sitting around and sewing his costume back together between issues, so he came up with this idea that his costume could be a biological substance that could self-heal. Now, this idea was never actually used in Iron Fist, so when Secret Wars rolled around, Roger Stern, who was one of the writers of Amazing Spider-Man number 252, asked if they could use the idea for Spider-Man's new costume. Scott, I get it. Spider-Man's black suit has a long history behind it. When are we getting to Venom? Guys, we're so close. Just hang in there because this is when it starts to get really interesting. Notice how the cover of issue 252 says the rumors are true. This is because word got out that Spider-Man was getting a black costume and the fans hated it. DeFalco and Ron Frenz, who were working on Amazing Spider-Man at the time, talked about how much hate mail they got before the first issue even went up on the shelves, and they were being accused of ruining the character. The reaction was so terrible that Jim Shooter told them to get rid of the costume in the next issue, but they couldn't do that because the issue of Secret Wars where he gets the costume in the first place hadn't even come out yet. They needed to keep the costume around long enough for the Secret Wars story to end, but they also needed a reason why Spider-Man would get rid of it in the first place. For all intents and purposes, it's a pretty practical costume to have. It self-repairs, generates its own webbing, can change into civilian clothing on command. It's basically just better all around than Spider-Man's classic costume. So DeFalco and friends came up with this idea that the costume was an alien symbiote that is trying to permanently bond itself to Spider-Man both mentally and physically. After Spidey removes it with the help of Mr. Fantastic's Sonic Blaster, he returns to his classic costume. The problem is now, though, the fans really liked the black suit for those 7 issues it was around, so they had Black Cat make him a new costume in Spectacular Spider-Man number 99 that looked exactly the same, but wasn't an alien life form. He would flip-flop between his classic costume and the black suit until Amazing Spider-Man number 300, where we finally get our first full appearance of Venom after briefly appearing in issue 299. Venom was created by David Michelini, who had a completely different idea for the character that he talks about in one of my new favorite purchases, Comics Creators on Spider-Man. Originally, and some of you may have heard this before, Venom was intended to be a woman. Michelini's original story went like this, but warning, it is pretty intense. A pregnant woman is about to give birth and her husband is trying to flag down a cab to take them to the hospital. But in that same part of the city, Spider-Man is fighting someone, and the cab driver that the husband is trying to get the attention of is distracted by the battle and accidentally hits the husband, killing him. The woman goes into labor right there as she watches her husband get run over. She loses her child and her mind. She's institutionalized and eventually gains back her sanity, but she does blame Spider-Man for the deaths of her husband and her baby. The alien symbiote would find her, bond with her, and together they would set out on a mission to kill Peter Parker for hurting them both. Michelini had even set up the character a few times in Web of Spider-Man. A trait of the symbiote is that it does not set off Peter Parker's spider sense. So in Web of Spider-Man number 18, a hand pushes Peter onto the subway tracks just as a train is flying by. He gets out of the way just in time, but is a little worried that something got past his spider sense. Another time was in Web of Spider-Man number 24 when Peter is hanging off the side of a building and we see a hand grabbing his leg, sending him falling to the ground. Now, as cool as that sounds, editor Jim Salkrup didn't think readers would see a woman as a physical threat to Spider-Man, even with the alien symbiote on her side. So Michelini came up with the Eddie Brock angle, and the rest is history. As I said earlier, Venom first appeared at the end of Amazing Spider-Man number 299. He goes to Peter and MJ's apartment, waits for MJ to come home, and terrifies her, which carries over to the next issue, number 300. Spidey and Venom have their first official confrontation, and the issue ends with Mary Jane wanting Peter to never wear the black costume again because of what Venom put them both through. Now, believe it or not, there's actually a real-world reason for this too. Todd McFarlane, who did the pencils for issues 299 and 300, did not like drawing the black costume at all. The series was offered to him months in advance, and he made it very clear that he preferred to draw the classic costume instead. It's not like he made that a condition of coming on board, but Michelini still worked in that part about Venom terrorizing MJ so that she would make Peter burn the black suit and go back to his traditional red and blue costume at the end of issue number 300. So there you go, the crazy history of Spider-Man's black costume and one of his greatest enemies, Venom. What I find most interesting about all this is the fact that the creation of Venom is in large part thanks to comic book fans. Whether it's superfan Randy Schueller, who came up with the concept of the black suit in the first place, or all those angry fans who wrote in so much hate mail about the black costume idea that it basically forced the writers to make it an alien symbiote that eventually bonds with Eddie Brock becoming Venom. And of course, Secret Wars was also inspired by the fans who desperately wanted a massive Marvel crossover story. As fans, our opinions and ideas have significant impact on the things that we are fans of. Either way, I'm curious to what you guys think. Would you have liked to see Michelini's original concept of a female Venom instead of Eddie Brock? And where do you stand on the black suit versus classic costume preference? Do you like the red and blue more, the black suit more, or one of Spider-Man's other costumes that he's worn over the years? Let me know in the comments. And why not go check out this week's podcast? We talked about our predictions and things that we're excited for in 2015, like that Fantastic Four movie that's definitely not going to be garbage. Link in the description if you want to go check that out, give it a listen. And if this is your first time hanging out with us here at NerdSync, we'd love you to hit that big, sexy subscribe button. We do weekly comic book videos just like this one every Wednesday, and we don't want you to miss out on any of it. Once again, I'm Scott. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram. We'll see you right here next week for more things that you thought you knew about comics. See ya.